everyone. How's the energy in the room? Good, great. So thank you very much. I would like to welcome all of you to this very powerful panel that I have and the discussion that we're going to have today. Today we're going to delve on the transformative power of storytelling and its pivotal role in creating visibility and impact for women in technology. The representation of women in leadership in technology sector remains a significant challenge both globally and in India. Despite some progress in recent years, the data reveals significant disparities in diversity, equity, and inclusion within the tech industry. According to NASSCOM, women make up 36% of India's tech workforce, but the share drops drastically as one starts looking up the corporate ladder. For instance, at the entry level, women account for nearly 48%, but at C-suite level, this drops to almost 29%. Furthermore, the disparity in compensation also still persists globally. And we see that women are approximately 77% of what men earn for a similar role. A study by UN Women highlights that gender biases and stereotypes continue to exist and thrive in the 21st century, which limits women's access to higher education and leadership roles in India, not just in technology, but across diverse sectors. So how can storytelling help turn this narrative around? Well, for a start, storytelling can enable women to articulate their journeys, outlining the challenges, the solutions, triumphs, and successes in ways that can create a lasting impact. I think we will all agree that storytelling is 20 times more effective and memorable than just a plain profile with facts and figures. Storytelling is all about humanizing the data and expressions, making all of it very relatable. Storytelling is the most powerful tool that allows you to stir emotions and helps your messaging to stick. Just as for brands, the why and how of a brand is bound to be more relatable and memorable before you explain the what. Personal storytelling to lead and inspire has to be modeled around the approach that trusted brands take in their campaigns that we all love. Let me give you an example of a digital campaign run by Amazon a couple of years ago, and Minari is here, probably she can talk more on that. The Find Life campaign captured the stories of 3 real-life customers, a heartwarming story of the outcomes of shopping on Amazon, a perfect melange of emotions and products. This emotional connect has got Amazon not just the market share, but also the heart and mind share. Similarly, for personal storytelling, it's important to start from your purpose, outline the challenges, and narrate your journey with passion, ending it with the impact you have made and your vision for greater good. Personal storytelling is all about being the hero of your story and capturing the heart and mind share. We will talk more on this session today with my esteemed. So let me introduce you to the panelists that I have. Rachna Panda, as we heard, she is with Bayer. But what we don't really know is that she has over 2 decades of industry experience as a mentor, board member, jury, and an influencer. She's a vice president and country group head at Bayer, but she's also a director at Bayer Foundation India and member of the Global Public Affairs leadership team. A Harvard Business School alumni, she's a founding board of GWPR in India and also the board member of APACD. She's a leading thought leader in communications, sustainability, and CSR. And in her past life, she has worked for GE, Alstom, Alcatel, TCI, and Apollo Tyres. Welcome, Rachna. Next, we have Minari, another visionary corporate communications leader. She is currently leading Amazon-owned content strategy for APAC, EU, and LATAM regions. She has over 2 decades of rich experience in regional and global leadership roles for large Indian and multinational companies, and she has successfully led high-impact teams and campaigns that have significantly shaped brand narratives. But what we don't really know is that she's not just good in these roles, she's also a film writer. That was something I discovered recently. Her commitment to building future leaders who are fearless in experimentation and her dedication to mentoring women for leadership roles are truly commendable. Our third panelist right next to me is Nivedita Morintham, who has over 23 years of experience in PR and communication, advertising, public affairs, and advocacy in the South Asia region. She is the head of communications for IKEA India, and her leadership is marked by a commitment to transparency, engagement, and impactful storytelling. Nivedita champions the belief that communication is a powerful driver of change and a crucial business. And finally, let's welcome our fourth panelist, Melissa Erlupan. I hope I said that right. The Director of Communications for Target India. With nearly 3 decades in PR and corporate communications, Melissa has held significant roles at prominent organizations, such as the Head of Communications at IQVIA and Vice President at Weber Shandwick prior to that. At Target, Melissa's strategic vision has driven impactful communication initiatives that resonate well with diverse audiences. Please join me once again in welcoming all the panelists. So let me start the discussion, and I would like to begin with you, Minari. Um, you're not just a content strategist, but also a film writer, as I mentioned earlier. So how do you define the storytelling, and what is the ideal framework of a story?
You know, when is it working? Yeah. So when one thinks about this framework for storytelling, traditionally, especially for script writing, but those who are doing, there are many frameworks. There is Pixar's framework, there is the hero's journey, which many of you might have heard about. But a lot of these apply to the formal storytelling. And I want to kind of differentiate between formal storytelling, which all of you do if you're in tech, case studies, or when you're making a business presentation. All of these are occasions for formal storytelling. I want to focus a little more here on the informal storytelling. All of us in our day-to-day interactions, how can you be intentional about who you're being perceived as? How do you really decide this is what matters to me? This is who I am. And therefore, I want to be seen as who I am rather than people making their assumptions. And therefore, controlling and owning that, to me, that's really the power of storytelling. How do you really use it? I wouldn't worry so much about the frameworks. I would simply worry about who is your target audience. Is it your colleagues? Is it your team? Is it your leadership? Is it your investors? Is it your board members? Is it your clients and customers? Who is that, target audience? And in this case of personal storytelling, this target audience is never a one-time, one-off thing. You're talking about at least a period of 3 months, 6 months, 1 year kind of frames when you must review and say, does that still hold true? So who is the primary target audience? What are the key takeaways that you want those audiences to take away about you? What do you want to stand for, which is truly you? And then start looking for anecdotes and personal milestones and events and life stories that really match up to that which you can use. Sometimes it seems, oh, that's not a big deal. I just need to talk about things that happened to me or happened with me. The problem is, most of us will not be able to come up with the actual immediate story, which is most important and relevant to what's happening, which is also connecting back to who we want to be seen as. So keeping that in mind and being intentional is what really matters. It's also about making a business point. And I've realized that sometimes this is even more important for women, especially women in leadership. You're often sitting in a room which perhaps largely has men or only men. You might be the only woman in the room. And sometimes to change the context, to change the perspectives of discussion, I think is really important. I was sitting in a leadership room once in a previous company where the conversation was about flexible work hours. This is all pre-COVID, so about 10 years back or more. And it was like, oh, we must give women flexible work hours. And I said, that's pointless. What's the point of giving only women those work hours? Because you know what? Women need their partners and family men to really start getting the work hours so that they can do more with their time. So just turning and twisting it around, sometimes the best of intentions don't carry through. So women can bring that context, but only if they're able to articulate it with the context, with the story and an anecdote. So to me, that's really very critical. Know your target audience. Think about your intentional thing. Think of Indra Nui. I think she's really good in using personal examples in how she gives it. So it's more about knowing who you want to be and expressing that. Don't worry so much about the frameworks.
Well, you may say don't worry about the framework, but I think you just gave that framework, so thank you. Moving on to Melissa, building on what Minari said, so if you were to share with women in tech here, whom we know as great problem solvers, how do they really master the art of storytelling that Minari just spoke about?
I'd like to start by saying, first of all, those of you who are in tech and the sciences, you understand cause effect. And I think storytelling is both an art and a science, and you get the science of it. So remember that you know that bit well, and that's very foundational to telling a good story. So don't lose sight of that. But how do you further build on it? And I think, I read somewhere about storytelling being like a well-orchestrated kind of symphony, where emotions is, your logic is really the bass notes, your emotions are your melody, and then you look at the credibility as your harmony. And you layer it with anecdotes, with data, and all of that to bring it to life. So I would agree with Minari in terms of remember who your target audience is. Start there. But I'd add a second in today's environment, which is know what medium you're going to tell that story on. Because like McLuhan said, when I started my career in communications, and then it kind of went out of the way, but I think it's important today, where the medium is the message. And you've got to be able to vary your message to suit that medium. You're all familiar with all this, various social media platforms. I don't need to say it. But remember the medium and remember your target audience. And then put together what you're so good at, which is the cause and effect, demystify it, and tell a good story.
Thanks, Melissa. Let me just move on to the next element of storytelling now, and I'll bring Rachna in here. Could you share your thoughts on how storytelling can be used to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion at workplace?
Thank you, Seema. Very interesting question. And, I personally feel storytelling is not restricted just for women or, anybody can be a storyteller. And we are not born with that skill. That needs to be honed. That needs to come as we grow. And it's a very powerful tool. One or two things that I want to add on here is, one, the timing is very important. The context is important, the timing. How do you tell a story and when do you tell a story? Every story has a right time to be picked up. And I think women have it very well. They know exact timing when to position it. Diversity in terms of diversity inclusion, I would say a company like Bayer, I'm not going to do the company pitch, but there are times that you work for an organization which is purposeful, and all of us, I think at our levels and even as women, look for purposeful brands. And for a company like Bayer, I think we have huge focus on diversity and inclusion. My role, particularly on my CSR side, on sustainability side, I am a storyteller, not always for myself, but mostly for others. Mostly for women in the rural sector who are agri-entrepreneurs, who are powerful drone operators, who are patients like Vijay was talking about in terms of different diseases and therapeutic areas, who are people trying to do a lot of women and from other communities, how they are trying to build their life. So my job is more of a storyteller for those communities. Personally, I would say on timing particularly, let me put it this way, right? During the COVID times, all of us shared stories in a very, very different way, very, very humanized storytelling. So which shows that as technology and as emotions get together, those are the powerful storytelling times. And COVID was a time where we could actually talk about, there was excellent example of how we position stories. Personally, there was a time where, I went through a personal health hazard, health condition, and I never wanted to talk about it. To a point, there were people in the organization who were wondering what's going on. Why is Rachna not visible? Why cannot we see her in meetings? And that's when I thought, I need to come out and talk about myself. And I'm sharing this, Seema, a little different from your question, but I thought it's important. The timing is important. There was also, I saw other people going through the whole process, and I was, this was 2022, when I was detected breast cancer. I wish I could meet Viji, and I love the way she talked about storytelling. Women do not take that initiative of coming out and talking about it till you're pushed to do it. But when I realized that this is something that I need to do it, not always for myself, but for others, I actually mustered up a lot of courage to do so. And I did not talk about it. I actually built a video where I wrote down my reflections while I was going through the therapy and the entire treatment. And I think that was extremely powerful. When I play that even today for myself, I feel extremely proud and amazed of the journey. And thank you. And today, when I am able to share with you, I do not talk with emotions. I talk with the real outcome based. And my purpose is, how do I build awareness around this entire issue? So storytelling needs right time, right context, relatable, and you always need a hero, not for yourself, but could be for others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachna, for sharing your personal story. Indeed, it was very inspirational. And I like the part where you said that you shared it not for yourself, but to help others. And that's what we as communicators always focus on, right? Going beyond yourself. Another point that I really noticed when you were talking about yourself was you said that you tell story of others, right? That is something that I have experienced that as women it comes to us, right? We are great at building stories for the brands that we work for. We are great at building stories for our teams, whatever. But when it comes to yourself, sometimes we feel shy. So on that note, I would move to Nivedita now. And I think building on what Rachna said, you need to be transparent and authentic. So Nivedita, you are a very passionate storyteller yourself. And you have also said that you really love telling stories. So how important do you think is being authentic? And if sometimes you feel that your story is not really sellable and there's no hero material in your story, even then, how do you really be authentic? Because you have to tell a story that resonates well with people, right? And many a times it happens, we feel, oh my God, we're not as good. So if you are in that frame of mind, how do you really build your story from there?
Um, Thank you. Uh, I'll start with the reason why we tell a story. And we don't tell stories only for the purpose of business. We tell stories uh, to inspire each other, to convince each other of something, to inform each other of something, or to trigger an action. And I think to be able to do that, it's not important only what the content is. The content is not the only important factor, but it's also important how we say it. And if the person in front of you can relate to what you are saying, whether it is your team or whether they are investors or whether they are your business partners or even your own family, then I think it's easier for us to be able to trigger that change or that action that we want to. So it's starting with the purpose of why we tell a story, and we do that often. It's not only consciously that we tell stories, it's also subconsciously when we're trying to convince somebody, when we're trying to pass across an information or a message. So I feel that if you are genuine, if you are real, and if you are expressing what you need to at the right time, of course, we've spoken about it with the right context, then it becomes really meaningful why we tell stories. I really go back and compare to how our parents, our grandparents used to tell us stories to be able to, um, convince us of some things or to teach us some things. So that was really for me an expression where, they feel genuine and they really want to trigger some good actions among, in their children. So that's always a comparison when I talk about stories. I always remember how we used to listen to stories from our parents. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So I think what Nivedita was saying was that being authentic is really important because if you're authentic, then you're able to relate to your audience very well. And if you're able to relate, then that's how you really create an impact. So let me continue with this personal experience sharing that started with Rachna, and let me move over to Minari. So, Minari, you've been with Amazon for long, and which is an America's leading brand and also the most loved brand in India. What role has storytelling played in building your personal brand, going beyond Amazon, and elevating your leadership presence at the organization? I would like to share how you really conducted yourself in the boardrooms and built your own brand.
I'm going to step back a little bit because I think, as communicators, and all of us on this panel are official communicators and storytellers, I think as communicators, we often tend to be used to taking the back seat and not focusing on our own personal brand. We tend to be making other heroes. Secondly, I think a lot of women tend to be especially diffident about putting themselves up front in terms of being the hero of their journey. Women just, a lot of women tend to, take the back seat and be hesitant about talking about themselves. Many very smart and successful women I know suffer from an imposter syndrome. So I think when I think about how have I done it, I think for a significant part of my work life, I don't think I was even consciously thinking about the personal brand at all. And I think I can think of 2, 3 different very specific incidents. One of them was not at Amazon. The first one, it must have been about 17, 18 years back. I remember it almost exactly because my son turns 18 in a few months, and that was my job just after he was born. And it was some conversation, and I happened to mention it to my boss then, that I was laughing, something we were talking about, and I laughed and said, I've just been very lucky. I've always had very good bosses. And he said, if for 15 plus years you've had very good bosses, take some credit. You can have one good boss, two good boss. If you've always had good bosses, maybe it's also about you. It really made me pause. I had never thought of it that way. That is, starting to think about who you are. And it actually made me go back to think about, okay, is there something about me? And I said, okay, yeah, I like to be positive. I like to be optimistic. I like to give people the benefits of doubt. And that kind of started me on a journey. But then the other part I discovered, when I was transitioning for the first time to lead a significantly large team, again, this was before Amazon, but again, transitioning from being a 1 or 2 or 3 people to a 10 people, 15 people team. And I realized that the only way I could do it was being vulnerable, by being giving of myself, by being open. And it's really hard. It doesn't come naturally to me to talk about myself. It doesn't come naturally to a lot of people. You know what, like Rachna just shared, it was very brave to share something personal. And it taught me that to get to know people beyond, are they good at their work, how are they working, just getting to know them as human beings, I had to give to be able to receive. And that being able to kind of lift the wheel and being true, it actually meant that over my last 2 or 3 jobs, I've had very close, friendships and relationships with my teams. And that, I think, has been a very important part for me as building the team. So I think that's my other part. And the third part, I think, is a lot of times I realized that when we are talking about storytelling, it doesn't only have to be about you. A lot of my storytelling gradually has been about people that have influenced me, where I grew up, teachers and bosses and parents and siblings that have influenced and played a very big role in shaping me. Today, as my son is about to turn 17 and 18, I learn so much from him all the time. And that's playing a role. So kind of, talking about people around me who matter, who I learn from, the instances in life, that have made a difference to my professional, personal, political, social opinions. I think those stories are very powerful. And they're not really, they're about me, but they're not about just me. And I think those stories matter immensely as well. And I think they kind of play a big role in letting people know who I am rather than my just talking about. And the final thing I think is, as I began mentoring about very seriously about 5, 6 years back, that's when I had to really go back and become more honest than I had ever been. I had to talk about places where I had failed, places where I had been low, places which were hard to navigate, personal failures or personal challenges. And those became my biggest um, obstacles initially because I was giving very generic gyan. And then I had to pause and say, I wouldn't like to listen to this. And I had to talk about, tragedies and going through an abusive marriage when I was very, very young, and like walking out of that, and all of those kind of situations. And before I said, okay, these things are what a lot of young women can identify, navigating through, today being in a partnership where two of us are both, very busy and negotiating and navigating through who does what. It goes beyond just the man woman thing. It's about so many negotiations. And being able to share real examples and real challenges has become, I think, a part of my storytelling and leadership style.
Thank you for sharing. So, yeah, you said it very beautifully that it starts with looking inside, figuring out who you are. And then, second thing to build on your personal story is to relate with people, be kind to them, build relationships, and that's how you can start building your own personality and your brand. Moving on, let me bring Melissa in here. There's a little specific question to the sector that both of us worked for together for some time. So in a science-led tech industry, innovation is key to finding solutions to life-impacting challenges. While building a brand narrative, one has to communicate complex science and processes. How have you, in your experience, simplified the technical jargon to build a compelling story?
Oh my gosh, this brings back memories because, as Seema said, I worked in the healthcare sector before this for 11 years and worked in a sector that was extremely volatile, clinical trials. I was sitting in my interview, for my final interview, reading a negative story about clinical trials. And it was an environment where there's so much of jargon, right? Because unless somebody really understands the complexities of clinical trials, they wouldn't understand the benefits and the value of it. But that was not where I could start with the story because of what Seema said. It's very complex. You have to demystify a lot. You're talking to the general public because there was a lot of media activism, social activism, etc. And so I found voices. And I think you start sometimes with the voice. Whose voice do you want to actually tell that story and what platform? And going back to what Rachna shared and Vijay shared earlier, I found patience. There were even at that point in time, even doctors not wanting to speak because they were being lambasted in the media. And I found these patients who had authentic stories to tell of how they participated in clinical trials. And we used that platform and those stories, undoctored, unfiltered, authentic stories of these patients to talk about what they had gone through. And I cannot tell you the positive results we had from that approach. So sometimes it is finding those voices. The second thing was also within the organization, we developed a glossary of terms that we would use, right? So if you use drugs, it could mean something negative externally. Remember, we're talking in various languages. So we use the word medicines. We didn't use clinical trials because clinical trials had such a negative perception. So we said clinical research. So these were other things that we had to do. And a lot of demystification of the process. At one press conference, I remember we actually had a role play by doctors to talk about what is called an informed consent process because they might not even understand it. So we did a role play for the media. So you have to find various ways to get that story out. And the same is true even in technology. I think that demystification is extremely important.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So simplification is really very, very important. If you want your message to land well with the audience, you have to see that you are simplifying it so that it is easily understandable. And I think that's what Melissa did very beautifully. Nivedita, I will come to you now. So specifically for tech, how do you think women in tech can use storytelling to influence decision making and lead teams? If you can share a personal experience.
I think it's really important for us to understand, as I said, why we why we have to demystify or decode what we are saying, the messaging in front of the right audience. But I do think that by telling a good story, by telling a relevant narrative, women already, whoever is, all of you, many of you in the field of technology, you have already broken barriers by being, in the technology sector, by contributing already, and by also creating this strong perception that women can go beyond prescribed professions, etc. And I do think that women can empower other women by sharing not only your successes, by sharing not only your the good stories, but also your challenges, the opportunities that we can create for each other, and by also promoting then each other to be able to join the technology workforce. That will also create diversity and you can say more inclusiveness for women in the technology sector. So that's what I think, that women can empower other women to join the technology workforce. Since we are talking about technology, it's also true for any other walk of life. But we can actually increase what you said, 35%, 39% participation of women in the technology workforce. It's actually more than the participation of the overall women workforce in India. The other thing that I would like to touch upon is how through the right storytelling, how through impactful storytelling, we will also be able to, you can say, create trust. Because trust at the core will be the reason why coworkers want to join our companies and our teams. Trust is the reason why our customers will stay with us in good times and also in bad times. And trust is also the reason why we'll attract more, potential to our organizations, to the workforce. So I do believe that to do that, we should be able to tell impactful stories. We should be able to, you can say, demystify technology, and also not talk only about product features and of course logic and science, but tell the stories of how it will impact human lives. Because technology is meant to simplify human lives, to make it easier for all of us. So by talking about the impact and by talking about why the technology exists, we will be able to relate more with our audience, and we will be able to create more success for our business. We will be able to create more confidence in the people who are associated with us, with our organizations, and of course, inspire each other. Yeah.
Well said, Nivedita. Thank you. Let me quickly move on to Rachna now. So, Rachna, we spoke about what you need to do and how you need to do. But I would like you to share and give us an example, if you can. How do you become the heroine of your blockbuster movie?
That's an interesting question. And here I will want to quote my daughter who says, "You don't have to be sad to be taken seriously." Right? So the best part that you can connect and engage with people, particularly the younger generation, I guess, is to have fun, is to use humor. And sometimes dry humor as well works very well. I think that's something that I really feel engages. When I talk to my daughter, and we talked earlier, you talked about it, Nivedita, that, our parents used to tell us stories. And when I tried to do that with my daughter, I'm sure a lot of you know, she's not interested to learn what I used to do when I was young once upon a time, right? So the timing is important, as I said, and also humor. How do you listen first and then give it back? And the next generation, or I would say the younger ones, love to have sarcasm and a little bit of a humor. I think that's something has worked very well for me. I've tried it with my daughter, has worked well. Sometimes not, but most of the times, yes. Even with my team, most of the time, it's not about always telling my part of the story. It is also listening from them and giving it back with a little bit of a humor, a little bit of a sarcasm, and that sticks on. I think that works. In our town halls, when I see leaders talk about themselves, the best leaders, the most engaging leaders are the ones who use humor and use it very spontaneously. Now, not everybody has that skill. I mean, even I am not very good in, using humor. But I think it's the age, the gray hair. Sometimes you take yourself not as seriously. And I think with age, we know you get the confidence and you say, okay, what happens if I try this? I think that's where I would say, it engages much more.
Thank you. Couldn't agree more. Humor, yes, important, and dry humor is even better. So I think I can't end here, though we have 4 more minutes to go. Minari, we spoke about how to be the heroine of your story. Now, tell me, how important is it to have a villain in your story? And who could this villain be?
So, when in the little bit of time I did film writing, yes, there would be a villain. It could be a person, it could be fate, it could be circumstances. But I don't think there should be a villain. I personally do not believe that storytelling needs any villain because to me, the best stories are where you are willing to own your life. And to me, a villain means you're actually ceding and giving up ownership. Of course, there's conflict. Of course, there are bad times. So one can accept that bad things happen, but taking responsibility, nobody, most people, yeah, there are social circumstances, there are hardships, toxic environments, all of those are true. But having the agency to change is our biggest superpower. And giving that up is when you start making villains of people or circumstances and situations. So I just say own it, accept your failures, accept and learn from it. Even if you were put in that situation due to what you thought was beyond your control, learn what made it beyond your control and change that. And that to me is really the superpower.
Yeah, so villain is essentially the challenges you face and how you convert those challenges into opportunities. So that's the perspective that I wanted to bring out in the discussion. So that's the question reason it was there. Melissa, again, moving back to you, how important it is to support your story with data. I mean, we spoke about anecdotes,
Yeah,
et cetera,
yeah,
but it's all subjective, right?
yeah. Um, so, a colleague of mine said this recently at his team meeting, which is be data informed, don't be data driven. And I think that is so important. Yes, use and refer to data, but use it when it fits. I think don't rely only on data while data is important. Is see how you translate it into anecdotes, into analogies, into testimonials. And I think that's what's important. So use data as your base, but don't let it rule you. And I'd like to just end by saying also what I always believe in for any form of writing is count every word and make every word count. And I think that's extremely important.
Very beautifully put. Count every word and make every word count. On that note, I would like to open the floor to questions. Yeah, please give your name and then mention the question is for whom.
Hi, I'm Swarna. My question is about tech industry or any industry for that matter, right? We have a very diverse crowd that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of people may just want the relationship to be transactional. They don't want to be vulnerable or open to conversations. I'm not saying everyone is like that, but at least 20% or 50% of the population may be that way. So when we are wanting to tell a story to convince someone of something or draw parallels to a situation or, um, for whatever reason, the other person may not be open to it. They may be like, cut the crap and
Come to
just
business.
get to the point, right? And they may also defy or deny your statements by saying, oh, that worked then. It may not always work, right? So have you faced such situations? If yes, how did you navigate those? And what is your recommendation to navigate those kind of instances?
Can I just go?
Yeah, okay, go
As
ahead.
someone who's worked in a tech industry for a very long time, no, I don't think so. I think two, three things, and I'm going to pick actually things which people here said. As Rachna pointed out, the timing matters. As Melissa pointed out, being crisp and brief and succinct matters. Knowing when to say it briefly and quickly is important. But again, I don't think it's about whether people are doing it or not. It's about you doing it and doing it in a very crisp. A story doesn't have to be 500 words. 3 words could be a story. So, So I don't think you should limit yourself by what others are doing or not, nor should you think that telling a story, just bringing a perspective by making it humane and relevant. And yes, of course, you want to mostly talk about things which are immediately relevant. So sometimes they're more recent, sometimes they're not, as might be the scenario. And the only other thing I would say is, especially working for a company that puts a lot of emphasis on experimentation, yeah, sometimes people could respond by saying that won't work or something like that. And I love the philosophy we have at Amazon, which is something which calls for a two-way door and a one-way door. There are situations where you can experiment and do something, and the stakes are not so crazily high that it's not possible for you to reverse that scenario and change direction or pivot back or turn back. And that's a two-way door. And then there are situations which is a one-way door when the stakes are very high and you need to be a lot more careful. So go ahead and experiment or encourage people to experiment and build stories. That's how I would say.
Thanks, Minari. Rajna, do you want to add? Okay. So let me just quickly add there. You heard from the panelists, right, that it is very important to identify who your target audience is. And no two people are similar. So I think in every situation, you have to assess the person that you're engaging with. What is it that the person is expecting? And then you have to communicate accordingly. So as Minari mentioned, it could be a 5-sentence story or it could be a 200 words, right? So you have to personalize your message based on who your target audience is. Yeah, yeah. I can see more hands in the room. Yeah, we'll take your question first. Okay, fine.
Hi, my name is Mansi. I'm a product manager at Google. So I have nearly a decade of experience of software engineering, and then I changed my ladder to product management. As product managers, we need to be advocates for our customers first, and then we need to be advocates for the product that we just created. How to tell a story to the customer in a way that you're authentic, you're not hyping the product more than what you've created, and still gain their trust and build a meaningful relationship that builds a long-term customer for your product.
Let me take a try on that one. The best products are the ones which talks about the benefits and the impact, right? Normally, I mean, as communicators, we do not like to talk about products. We like to talk about the impact of the product that it has, or we call it the beneficiary stories. I think that really, really helps.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Let me just add a bit on that. Yeah, as you rightly said, Rajna. So the benefit will come in, but before that, what you need to do is you need to identify which is this customer need that your product is going to address, right? So once you start with that, and then you build it in with the beneficiary story and lead it to impact, you will be able to gain trust of your customers.
And I'd just like to say, on the product side, you'll play a very strategic role. So you partner with businesses, with design, with engineering teams and things like, recognize the role, first of all, that you play and that importance that you have, and then go with the rest.
Yeah, I can see time is up flashing on the screen, so I'm afraid I don't think we can take any more questions. But you have the panelists available for some more time, so on the sidelines, possibly you can ask them your questions. So on behalf of GSCI, I would like to thank all my esteemed panelists today. Thank you for being here today, and especially Minari and Rachna, who flew into Bangalore to be with you, to talk to you. Well, I had an amazing time moderating. I hope you guys enjoyed too. Yeah, thank you.